Hello everyone. It's been a couple of days since I put up one of these read-along videos. I've been quite busy putting the class list together for next week, so I hope you'll forgive me. And you might be surprised as well that I'm saying we're doing Paradise Lost, because that's not a Gothic novel. And no, it certainly isn't. We're looking at Paradise Lost because this week's class is on representations of the demonic in Gothic literature. And the Paradise Lost Satan was an incredibly influential depiction of Satan within the 18th century, and particularly on both writers and theoreticians of the Gothic. What we're seeing towards the end of the 18th century is this rereading and reimagining of the Miltonic Satan through the lens of romantic sensibilities. William Blake, for example, has suggested that, of course, Milton was of the devil's party, making Satan the true anti-hero, let us say, of Paradise Lost. And you have Jacobin or Jacobin adjacent thinkers such as William Godwin, who suggest that, and I'll quote here, he bore his torments with fortitude because he disdained to be subdued by despotic power. In other words, Satan became this sort of symbol of a rebel, of a renegade, of somebody turning against or rejecting authoritarian power. So this is something that you certainly see in the period and in romantic texts such as Byron's play Cain, and in the work of other romantic poets, of course. In the Gothic, the relationship to Milton's Satan is a little bit more complex. Within Gothic narratives, the devil is quite frequently simply pictured in a relatively orthodox way as the enemy of God and the enemy of man, who is tempting away various characters across different novels, such as The Monk by Matthew Lewis, The Floyer by Charlotte Dacre, or The Confessions of a Justified Sinner by James Hogg. So the devil is a tempter and somebody who brings ruin and damnation. But a lot of the visual imagery associated with Satan is still, I would argue, directly linked to this Miltonic version of Satan, because it's something that's worth remembering, that a lot of our conception of Satan is not specifically biblical within the Christian tradition. There are actually very few passages which mention Satan at all, and certainly that sort of the fall from heaven. I have a resource if anyone would like it, which maps all of the biblical references which are made in the first book of John Milton. But what we have in the imaginary of the devil within the 18th, 19th, 20th, 21st century is actually quite a lot of borrowing from sort of Catholic doctrine and iconography, and then literary works such as Dante's Inferno and, in the British tradition, John Milton's Paradise Lost. So what I'm going to do today is just read you some of the first book of Paradise Lost, where we're introduced to Satan, and he certainly does appear to be a heroic or anti-heroic figure here. I would argue that through the rest of Paradise Lost, his true nature becomes increasingly revealed until he assumes the form of the worm towards the end, and where he's shown to be petty and vindictive, as well as having this sort of heroic stance. But within this romantic rereading, this the Satan that appears in Book 1 of Paradise Lost is really the key image within that rereading. So where I'm going to join the text now is very close to the beginning of Book 1. Milton is talking about how the muse is telling him to justify the ways of God to man. And he's going to give a story of the fall, both the fall of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, which within the Christian tradition is the point at which sin entered the world, when Eve and Adam defied God's restriction to not eat from the tree of good and evil. And it's also going to depict the fall of Satan. And this is much more really Milton padding this out, because there isn't really much of a biblical tradition for this. So I hope you enjoy it. It's some of my favourite poetry. I love it. It's beautiful. It's incredibly well expressed. Oh, gorgeous. So hopefully you'll enjoy it with me. And at the end, I'm just going to draw out a few little tiny points from the reading. So I hope you enjoy with me, and forgive me if I don't sound very demonic. So here it's telling us how Adam and Eve fell, basically. That's where we're starting. The infernal serpent, he it was whose guile, stirred up with envy and revenge, deceived the mother of mankind, what time his pride had cast him out from heaven with all his host of rebel angels, by whose aid, aspiring, he set himself in glory above his peers. He trusted to have equalled the Most High, if he opposed, and with ambitious aim against the throne and monarchy of God, raised impious war in heaven, and battle proud, with vain attempt. Him the almighty power hurled headlong, flaming from the ethereal sky, with hideous ruin and combustion, down to bottomless perdition, there to dwell in adamantine chains and penal fire, who durst defy the omnipotent to arms. 9 times the space that measures day and night to mortal men, he with his horrid crew lay vanquished, rolling in the fiery gulf, confounded though immortal. But his doom reserved him to more wrath. For now the thought both of lost happiness and lasting pain torments him. Round he throws his baleful eyes that witnessed huge affliction and dismay, mixed with obdurate pride and steadfast hate. At once, as far as angels ken, he views the dismal situation, waste and wild, a dungeon horrible on all sides round, as one great furnace flamed, yet from those flames no light, but rather darkness visible, served only to discover sights of woe, regions of sorrow, doleful shades, where peace and rest can never dwell, hope never comes that comes to all, but torture without end still urges, and a fiery deluge fed with ever-burning sulphur unconsumed. Such place eternal justice had prepared for those rebellious. Here their prison ordained in utter darkness, and their portion set as far removed from God and light of heaven as from the centre thrice to the utmost pole. Oh, how unlike the place from whence they fell! There the companions of his fall, o'erwhelmed with floods and whirlwinds of tempestuous fire, he soon discerns, and weltering by his side, one next himself in power, and next in crime, long after known in Palestine and named Beelzebub, to whom the arch-enemy, and thence in heaven called Satan, with bold words breaking the horrid silence, thus began. If thou beest he, but oh, how fallen, how changed from him, who in the happy realms of light, clothed with transcendent brightness, didst outshine myriads, though bright. If he whom mutual league, united thoughts and counsels, equal hope and hazard in the glorious enterprise, joined with me once, now misery hath joined an equal ruin. Into what pit thou seest, from what height fallen, so much the stronger proved he with his thunder. Until then who knew the forces of those dire arms? Yet not for those, nor what the potent victor in his rage can else inflict, do I repent or change. Though changed in outward lustre, that fixed mind and high disdain from sense of injured merit, that with the mightiest raised me to contend, and to the fierce contention brought along innumerable forces of spirits armed, that durst dislike his reign, and me preferring his utmost power with adverse power opposed in dubious battle on the plains of heaven, and shook his throne. What though the field be lost? All is not lost. The unconquerable will and study of revenge, immortal hate and courage never to submit or yield. And what else not to be overcome? That glory never shall his wrath or might extort from me. To bow and sue for grace with suppliant knee, and defy his power, and deify his power, who from the terror of this arm so late doubted his empire. That were low indeed. That were an ignominy and shame beneath this downfall. Since by fate the strength of gods and this imperial substance cannot fail, since through experience of this great event, in arms not worse, in foresight much advanced, we may with more successful hope resolve to wage by force or guile eternal war, irreconcilable to our grand foe, who now triumphs, and in the excess of joy sole reigning holds the tyranny of heaven. So spake the apostate angel, though in pain, vaunting aloud, but racked with deep despair. And him thus answered soon his bold compeer. O Prince, O chief of many throned powers, that led the embattled seraphim to war under thy conduct, and in dreadful deeds fearless endangered heaven's perpetual king, and put to proof his high supremacy, whether upheld by strength or chance or fate. Too well I see and rue the dire event that with sad overthrow and foul defeat hath lost us heaven, and all this mighty host in horrible destruction laid thus low, as far as gods and heavenly essences can perish. For the mind and spirit remains invincible, and vigour soon returns, though all our glory extinct and happy state here swallowed up in endless misery. But what if our conqueror, whom I know of force believe almighty, since no less than such could have overpowered such force as ours, have left us this our spirit and strength entire, strongly to suffer and support our pains, that we may so suffice his vengeful ire, or do him mightier service as his thralls by right of war, whate'er his business be, here in the heart of hell to work in fire, or do his errands in the gloomy deep. What can it then avail, though yet we feel strength undiminished, or eternal being, to undergo eternal punishment? Whereto with speedy words the arch-fiend replied, Fallen cherub, to be weak is miserable, doing or suffering, but of this be sure, to do aught good never will be our task, and e'er to do ill our sole delight, as being the contrary to his high will whom we resist. If then his providence out of our evil seek to bring forth good, our labour must be to pervert that end, and out of good still to find means of evil, which oft times may succeed, so as perhaps shall grieve him, if I fail not, and disturb his inmost counsels from their destined aim. But see, the angry victor hath recalled his ministers of vengeance and pursuit back to the gates of heaven. The sulphurous hail shot after us in storm, while blown hath laid the fiery surge that from the precipice of heaven received us falling. And the thunder, winged with red lightning and impetuous rage, perhaps hath spent his shafts, and ceases now to bellow through the vast and boundless deep. Let us not slip the occasion, whether scorn or satiate fury yield it from our foe. Seest thou yon dreary plain, forlorn and wild, the seat of desolation, void of light, save what the glimmerings of these livid flames cast pale and dreadful? Thither let us tend from off the tossing of these fiery waves. There rest, if any rest can harbour there, and reassembling our afflicted powers, consult how we may henceforth most offend our enemy, our own loss how repair, how overcome this dire calamity, what reinforcement we may gain from hope, if not, what resolution from despair. Thus Satan, talking to his nearest mate, with head uplift above the wave and eyes that sparkling blazed, his other parts besides prone on the flood, extending long and large, lay floating many a rood in bulk as huge as whom the fables name of monstrous size, Titanian or earthborn, that warred on Jove, Briareus or Typhon, whom the den by ancient Tarsus held, or that sea beast Leviathan, which God of all his works created hugest, that swim in the ocean stream. Him, haply slumbering on the Norway foam, the pilot of some small night-founded skiff, deeming some island off, as seamen tell, with fixed anchor and his scaly rind moors by his side under the lee, while night invests the sea and wished morn delays. So stretched out huge in length the arch-fiend lay, chained on the burning lake. Nor ever thence had risen or heaved his head, but that the will and high permission of all-ruling heaven left him at large to his own dark designs, that with reiterated crimes he might heap on himself damnation, while he sought evil to others, and enraged might see how all his malice served but to bring forth infinite goodness, grace, and mercy, shown on man by him seduced, but on himself treble confusion, wrath, and vengeance poured. Forthwith upright he rears from off the pool his mighty stature. On each hand the flames driven backward slope their pointing spires, and rolled in billows leave in the midst a horrid veil. Then with expanded wings he steers his flight, aloft incumbent on the dusky air, that felt unusual weight, till on dry land he lights, if it were land that e'er burned with solid as the lake with liquid fire, and such appeared in hue as when the force of subterranean wind transports a hill torn from Pelorus, or the shattered side of thundering Etna, whose combustible and fueled entrails, thence conceiving fire, sublimed with mineral fury, aid the winds, and leave a singed bottom all involved with stench and smoke. Such resting found the soul of unblessed feet. Him followed his next mate, both glorying to have escaped the Stygian flood as gods, and by their own recovered strength, not by the sufferance of supernal power. Is this the region, this the soil, the clime, said the lost archangel, this the seat that we must change for heaven, this mournful gloom for that celestial light? Be it so, since he who now is sovereign can dispose and bid what shall be right. Farthest from him is best, whom reason hath equalled, force hath made supreme above his equals. Farewell, happy fields, where joy forever dwells. Hail horrors, hail infernal world, and thou, profoundest hell, receive thy new possessor, one who brings a mind not changed by place or time. The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. What matter where, if I be still the same, and what I should be, all but less than he whom thunder hath made greater? Here at least we shall be free. The Almighty hath not built here for his envy, will not drive us hence. Here we may reign secure, and in my choice to reign is worth ambition, though in hell. Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. But wherefore let we then our faithful friends, the associates and partners of our loss, lie thus astonished on the oblivious pool, and call them not to share with us their part in this unhappy mansion, or once more with rallied arms to try what may be yet regained in heaven, or what more lost in hell. So I'm going to finish there. We've seen Satan and Beelzebub there rise from the lake of fire to start to claim hell as their dominion. There are a few really interesting points here. One of them that I'll explain just in case you're not aware, those references to subterranean winds is a reference to the contemporary belief that that's what caused earthquakes. So yes, if that didn't make sense to you, I hope it does now. So that's about earthquakes and volcanoes. You've also got here a couple of different interesting, for example, theological points, one of which is very relevant to the Gothic. You have that idea by Beelzebub where he puts forward, well, perhaps we're going to be used to serve God. And then you have in the discourse by the narrator this idea that the devil is only allowed to raise his head in order for God to heap further punishment on him, but also perhaps to turn him to God's purpose. Not deliberately, but that everything that the devil will do will inevitably lead to God's mercy or God's glory. And I think that's a really interesting point that you see in Gothic novels, where the devil often, in the case of the monk, for example, acts as the tempter in the damnation, but ends up effectively doing God's work by reiterating the judgments from the throne of God. So he ends up being a punisher of the wicked, not the righteous. So doing the same as God, really. You've also got some of these really interesting ideas about Satan that are going to appear later in the Byronic Hero, something we discussed in class last week. So the idea of, how is it phrased, that the mind is its own place and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven, is very linked to that idea of perpetual exile, and the idea of the Byronic Hero as carrying with him his own alienation. You've also got, of course, that really famous line, and I didn't really do it justice, I'm sorry. I wish I had a more demonic voice, but that it is better to reign in hell than serve in heaven. And this sense of the rejection of tyranny and the acceptance of lesser conditions, the acceptance of loss in order to rebel, in order to reject the dominant societal structures, or in this case, the dominant theological structures. Anyway, I hope that's been an interesting an introduction to Paradise Lost and how we might be looking at it in the class, or how you might be looking at it if you're studying Romanticism and the Gothic more generally at home. And apologies if my reading got lost at times. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you go on to read more. It's just beautiful, isn't it? Oh, love it. Love it so much. Anyway, thank you for reading with me. I have been Dr. Hurst, Sam or Holly as you prefer. Sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. And hopefully I'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye.